Uh-oh. Illegitimate questions. Fire away.
Any real questions?
Oh. Well, first of all, it sounds great, you guys. One of the things I notice from listening is that obviously, nearly without exception, you're very mature players. Nearly without exception. No, obviously you guys are playing at the highest level, and one of the things that I notice in the improvisation is that you seem to develop a part rather quickly. And Ryan, one of the things I really dig about your playing is that if it's, well, sometimes you're feeling it in halftime, and to me that helps to relax a groove. And I was wondering if, first of all, if you guys could talk about how you develop those parts, or how you conceptualize staying out of each other's way. I really like the idea of talking about how you develop a melody over a tune also, rather than just playing a vamp. And that kind of rolls into something that you've touched upon a little bit, which is the art of not playing and the art of staying out of each other's way as you're developing a more compositional approach to improvisation. And it's kind of a lot in there, but if, you know.
Yeah. I think over the years we've tend to find roles. I think like harmonic roles that work, that suit us individually. Like it's like if Bayless is always playing up high where I would be playing, maybe it wouldn't mesh. So we try to stay out of each other's way. Like if you look at a symphonic score, like you got the piccolos and clarinets up here, that might be my role as far as the spectrum of sound. Joel being like the bassoon area, and you know, or whatever. So I kind of think of it like that, you know.
And that's
as far as like layering, like harmonic textures, and like, well, I kind of stay out of your way if I play not in your octave or something like that.
Exactly, and you've got to be kind of aware of whoever is playing the melody when you're supporting that, because they might change octaves too. So, you know, if Jake is playing a lead and then he brings it back down an octave, then I might switch from being in the middle octave and shift up to something higher so that I'm not competing with him. So it's a constantly evolving thing too. It's not something that, you know, it's like, oh, this is where we all play, you know, depending on, like Jake was saying, depending on who's playing the lead, your role can kind of shift. So you've got to be ready to be malleable. And even section to section, when we're doing like these A and B sections, sometimes one person has a lead on one section and another person has the melody on the other section. So I think organizationally, that's definitely something we're trying to do more and more of.
Yeah, I really think that in-ear monitoring, like it's like I feel sorry for guys 30 years ago, you know, that tried to ever do anything like this to this extent, because you can set up the mix where Joel's completely to the left side, Bayless is right in the center, or I'm right in the center, and Bayless is all the way over here. So whoever says something, I can instantly detect what's going on just by a stereo spread mix in my in-ears. So that really helps out.
What you said about coming up with parts is my approach for me personally is, as soon as something starts, I try and step back and just listen for a couple bars, and if it's great, then I don't need to do anything, right? And I'm quite content just like taking a sip of wine and listening for a little bit. And then if I can come up with a super simple part to just kind of comp and support something that I can repeat for a while, then I can start thinking about developing it or going in another direction. But I do what you just said, is I come up with like a part, so then I don't have to think about that part anymore, and I can start thinking about something else. And I think we all do that. We kind of lock into that, and everyone's got like a spot. And the simpler the part, yeah? Yeah. Letting it breathe. Yeah.
Yeah, because I think the inclination is to just jump in on something, because if it feels good, you want to be part of it. Yeah. But sometimes the reason it feels good is because you're not part of it. I don't mean you personally.
Yes, you do.
I feel the same way about Brennan, Jeff. I'm glad you pointed that out.
But especially for me as a horn player also, like, because I can't play harmony, I can't play chordal, rhythmic structures. I have to step back and figure out, okay, well, what am I going to do on top of this that will hopefully, enhance it in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. So I have to step back, and a lot of times I hear that people aren't really willing to do that, but I think you bring up a beautiful point there, and again, that's the thing that I'm talking about playing at the highest level and being a very mature musician that allows you to be secure in what you're playing by saying, hey, I'm going to step out of this for a minute and figure out where's my place.
Right. A little thing that I try to do, and we'll get into this. I think it's tomorrow. We have the ear training thing, but a big thing is being able to have an idea in your head and then know how to translate that to your instrument without practicing it. How you hear something. So, for instance, Brennan's laying out. Or I'm laying out and I hear something. An example would be a thing that we put on one of our Hall of Fame records, and I think we called Den. And Ryan started a bass line that was this D minor, then B flat, A, B flat, really simple, just 4-chord thing. And so I laid out for a while trying to come up with something in my head, and I was like, okay, I kind of got this triplet thing. And then waited and then played this once I had it down in my head what it was that I wanted to do. So kind of, let that thing develop a little bit. And I was kind of, as I was fumbling around with it the first time, I was definitely kind of figuring out the harmonies. It took a few times through for me to get the interior stuff, but have that melody and then know how to execute it right away. So that's something that with a lot of ear training and interval training, you'll get better at, and eventually being able to execute those ideas in any key and do them very efficiently so that there isn't this long stretch of uncomfortable time where you're fumbling around trying to develop it.
Yep.
That is a really good question, especially for bass. I think specifically when you're in a band with two sets of trios. Whenever those improv or Jimmy Stewart parts come up, a lot is going on in your mind on what's about to happen. Are you going to be repetitive and groove-oriented with something that's tight with the drums and percussion that you develop over and over and let these guys texture on top of? Is that something where you want to go? Or do you want to go where you want to emulate another bass player where, say, just for example, like you want to play kind of like a Grateful Dead jam and you're like Phil Lesh and you're kind of, you're all over the place and you're just leading it and you're not repeating the same phrase over and over again. So those are instant decisions that come in. And then there's other decisions too where with 6 people, you don't know who's going to take the reins first. Sometimes Jake will, and I'll lay out and try to figure out exactly what he's going to play. Listen, figure it out, and then develop my part to it, whether I want to really make a simple bass line to it, a harmony. And I also wanted to point out that all these signals that we were doing before, we don't always rely on them for everything. We do use our ears a large percentage of the time. Like if we're in A minor, I'll float and change the bass, the root, and the tonic, and these guys will jump right on it just from years and years of playing. We're not always looking at each other when we change keys. And then you made me think of another thing. Bass players, you've obviously heard of Victor Wooten, Marcus Miller, and Stanley Clark. I heard Victor talking about when they did school days for bass camp or super bass camp school. He went back to his room and thought about, there's 3 basses playing one song. And you really have to sit back and figure out what your part is going to be because everybody's in the same register. There's not a lot of range to choose from. And you can YouTube it. It's pretty awesome. And Vic went back and did everything in high harmonics when he came out. His part was very percussive with harmonics, where Stanley did the main riff and Marcus did like a low percussive slap part too. So you always have these options too, because Joel and I have a whole range of his Rick Wakeman setup over here has a lot of low end and low keys. So I have to be paying attention when he gets into that fuzzy Moog that I don't go over here and jump on my octave pedal or on my Moog because it's just too much going on. So you got to understand what's happening and developing so you appreciate the space or when to lay out. If we're in more of a house jam and he's laying bass lines down over there, I'm going to stop and listen because he's already pumping the PA with the low end. And then I can think of something chordal or melodic or harmony to play up on the high end and have those options. So there's a lot going on in the improvisation, and I think especially for bass, because you can lead and you can be the foundation, or you can be monotonous and groove, or you can pretty much do whatever you want and try to make it run the ship.
We'll lock up too once in a while. That's, with the bass line thing. Sometimes I'll play an octave up from what he's doing on the Moog, and so the big thing then will be, how long are we going to play this together, and let's make sure we stop doing it at the same time. So sometimes that's a little eye contact thing too, but that sounds good, as opposed to doing something again that maybe is its own thing and muddies up the mix. Sometimes it's a better choice to jump on what Ryan's doing and kind of solidify that groove.
Yeah. And real quick too, in the early days, we didn't really pay attention as much to details as much. We were just like, hey, let's make sure we're in the same key or making a unison line. But now we really try and pay attention, especially in like a chorus, that we're holding the note for the exact same time to the end of the measure and releasing at the same time.
Right.
So I mean, and vocally, we practice this too. Not me, because I don't sing, but vocally ending on or holding out the notes and everything too, so it's very tight. That stuff makes a huge difference in your live playing.
Yeah, we didn't even think about that for years. That we only were thinking about, okay, let's make sure we start the note in the same place. But it's just as important to end things together.
You get the
it's something to keep in mind.
I was just going to say one thing real quick on the drummer's role of this whole situation. Of course, we're always thought of as the timekeepers. Like everyone relies on you for your pulse. I have to say that I think what we've learned over the years, and I've sort of implied with the guys, is that it's not all about the drummer keeping the time all the time. Sometimes I might go and when I first joined the band, I figured out my role pretty quickly, because Jake I can relate to very quickly, because I've had past players kind of similar to the way he plays, in that he's got the similar influences, Frank Zappa and a lot of Mahavishnu and a lot of different fusion players, and he can play at pretty much any style. And for me as a drummer, I find it interesting to create a wilderness behind a soloist, and he was the first guy I could really dig into and be like, okay, I'm going to go away from the time a little bit, and instead of just keeping that Clyde Stubblefield, James Brown kind of time, I'm going to go off and solo phrasings with him. And I'm telling drummers here that it's good to be technical and to be progressive, but make sure you understand why you're playing what you're playing. Because I noticed in some of the jam sessions last night, there were some great players with a lot of technique, but it's very typical of younger players to have all that technique and use it at the wrong times. So I was going to say, use it when you're feeling it behind a soloist. The whole reason we're doing this is because we're creating a human, a spontaneous composition with each other, not with ourselves. And just one thing to keep in mind when we're thinking of the role playing here. Thank you.
Chris brings up another good thing that happens in this band a lot that I continue to work on and practice on all the time. A lot of times you're in bands where the drum and bass will lay it down and keep the groove the same. And for example, sometimes Jake does a lot of cross rhythms, or he'll start playing an odd meter, and Chris is known to follow that a lot. So all of a sudden you've got the drums and the guitar playing an odd meter and cross rhythms, and then Joel and I laying it down, still staying on that 4/4. And I think that's great practice for bass and drummers to do together, where let one go off and still holding that one to make sure that you come back tight. Because I've definitely been guilty of Harry Houdini and losing the one, and like, woo.
Yeah.
But that's a good practice, and Chris and I work on that too, to get outside and come back tight together.
A lot of the time when stuff like that's happening, for example, the end of Bridgeless, I'm actually counting, kind of like, just like whispering it to myself, but actually counting 1 EN, 2 EN, 3 EN, 4 EN, like off a microphone. But I'm doing that to help me keep the time. Like, it's okay to be up there and kind of do that. Feel free to do it out loud in your head, whatever. But it's definitely, when you have a drummer who is displacing the one, you want to keep that tightness, and so that's one thing that I do live, just to make sure that I don't get off where the downbeat is.
Real quick, to get back to Jeff's point, I like to think about the music thing that we're trying to do as a conversation. So like you have your circle of friends, and you can walk away from having a good conversation where you're listening to what they're saying and then you're responding, and then you also have your friend who, I don't know if he's drunk or whatever, just won't shut the fuck up and will just talk the whole time, and he's annoying as hell. And in my mind, I try and remind myself, don't be that guy. And if I ever find myself that I'm playing a lot, I think about it like that. Like, this is a conversation, and if you're not listening and you're just talking, they're not going to be listening to you. It's a turnoff. So a healthy conversation is a lot of give and take. You gotta back off and make sure, or you're just spitting your mouth. You're just blah 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 blah. So I think about frequently is
Yeah.
the conversation part of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, us as a band, no matter what level you're at, that's a continued process, no matter who you are. It's actually, it's a beautiful thing, you know. I know personally, I'm trying to learn too to not play so many fills at times when I'm starting to feel the busy moniker, you know. It's time, you know, to bring it back, and depending on this, it's all coming down to the style features you're creating, and it's all the history you learn from the music you listen to. What is this? What is the flow of this, and where is it coming from? Because everything sort of derives from something. No matter what anyone says, no matter what any artist says, my personal opinion is that everything comes from something. And it just doesn't come out and fall out in the sky and land in your lap. It takes effort. And I definitely encourage everyone to continue with your lessons and learn to know when to play less and when to play more. And it all depends on the language. Yeah.